Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. As the year 2025 winds down, tensions on the Korean Peninsula are escalating once again. North Korea is sending thousands of workers to Russian drone factories, stepping up cyber theft operations and issuing sharp warnings toward Japan. Meanwhile, Seoul is working multiple diplomatic channels, quietly approaching Moscow, coordinating with Washington and Beijing, and watching for signals ahead of Pyongyang's major party congress early next year. Amid renewed speculation of a Trump-Kim summit and rising military friction along the MDL, we take a closer look at where the region is headed strategically, diplomatically, and militarily. And for this, we are joined in the studio by Dr. Go Myong-hyun, Senior Research Fellow at the Institute for National Security Strategy. A big welcome, Dr. Go.
Good to be here.
And also joining us is John Nielsen-Wright, head of the Japan and Korea's program at the Center for Geopolitics at the University of Cambridge. Good to see you.
Pleasure to be here as always.
So let's begin our discussion first with Dr. Go, with the beginning, the deepening ties between Pyongyang and Moscow. So North Korea is reportedly sending 12,000 workers to a Russian drone factory, likely enabling a transfer of weapons technology. How serious do you see this?
So in a way, North Korea is mirroring what South Korea is doing. South Korea has become, in a sense, an arsenal of democracy. So South Korea is supplying weapon systems, important technology, as well as munitions to our allies and partners, United States, Canada, NATO countries in Europe. So in a way, North Korea is mirroring that and helping its own partner, in this case, Russia. So you could say that North Korea has become an arsenal of authoritarian regimes. But then in contrast to South Korea, which mostly provides value-added components as well as technology to our allies and partners, North Korea is providing Russia with what they have in abundance, which is labor. So in a sense, North Korea and Russia, they are getting tighter, obviously, but then this, in fact, shows that North Korea and Russia are building a supply chain of weapon systems together. So the know-how, the production know-how that North Koreans are probably acquiring through this partnership with Russia is going to spread around, and also it's going to help North Korea to build its own drone capability. So in that sense, we are seeing a quite integration of military production, development, and supply chain between Russia and North Korea. So in that sense, it's really augmenting North Korea's threats and capability.
So that's definitely this military and industrial connection. It's raising eyebrows for many. Another layer has, in fact, emerged in the diplomatic track. Korean officials held quiet talks with the Russian counterparts in Moscow, but the Kremlin flatly denied any such dialogue. Professor Nielsen-Wright, what does that response actually tell us about Russia's current diplomatic position?
Well, I think it reflects what is often the case with Russia's diplomacy, a gap between its public declaratory statements and its private initiatives. In terms of those private talks between South Korean and Russian officials, I think it's a sign that looking ahead to a potential end to the conflict in Ukraine, the Russians recognize, as they have done consistently, I think, when it comes to South Korea, that there are opportunities here for a re-establishment of closer ties. There are economic common interests that bind Russia and South Korea close together. Hyundai, of course, has investments in Russia, and the corporate economic ties are important. And, of course, from the point of view of the South Korean government of President Lee, this is a pragmatic approach, recognizing that there are powerful reasons why, given the strength of the new relationship between Moscow and Pyongyang, why South Korea has to test the waters for a re-establishment of closer ties. That complementary relationship that Dr. Go was explaining in his remarks, I think, is a source of real strategic risk to Seoul. The concern that as North Korea and Russia become closer, North Korea will acquire the means to increasingly threaten South Korea's security, particularly the development of satellite technology, enhancing North Korea's ballistic missile capabilities, but also its wider conventional forces in general. And therefore, it may be that Seoul is hoping that with a dialogue with Moscow, it might be able to restrain some of that progress. But it's also, I think, a reflection of the economic importance of the relationship between Moscow and Seoul.
It's indeed a sensitive issue, considering how important Pyongyang has become to Moscow. Now, at the same time, Seoul hasn't also been idle. It also was engaging both with Washington and Beijing on nuclear diplomacy. So, Dr. Go, how might Pyongyang interpret this trilateral diplomacy? And do you think there's a real leverage in play?
Well, clearly South Korea lacks leverage vis-a-vis North Korea. Partly because North Korea doesn't want to speak to the South at the moment, based on the fact that North Korea considers South to be a hostile state. So all the diplomatic and communication channels have been cut off. So in a way, what's going on in this shuttle diplomacy between Seoul, Washington, and Beijing is a product of necessity for South Korea. But I think there's a clever I think, tactics at play here. So when it comes to the United States, which is the main thrust of South Korean diplomatic efforts, because clearly there's an interest on the part of Kim Jong-un to have a face-to-face meeting with President Trump, but although President Trump clearly has probably more interest than Kim Jong-un at this time. But then President Lee has appointed himself as the pacemaker to President Trump's peacemaker mission. So in that sense, I think that there's already a commonality or overlapping, agenda between Washington and Seoul. And it's really a matter of South Korea to remind President Trump to be focused on this effort. So in that sense, I think that there's not much of a friction between the two sides. And then also, it also shows that Seoul and Washington are strategically aligned when it comes to North Korea. Beijing is a little bit different. Beijing is, on the surface and publicly has expressed support for North Korea's, and at the same time, he has criticized the international community's sanctions regime arrayed against Pyongyang right now. So on the surface, it looks like China is supporting North Korea, and in fact, this support could extend to North Korea's illicit nuclear development program, because as we discussed last month, China has removed the language of denuclearization from its non-proliferation report, which came out first time in 19 years. But then that's the public stance on the part of Beijing. If you reapproach them privately, apparently there are some mixed signals coming from Beijing. It seems like, unlike Russia, China seems to be still critical of the fact that North Korea is undermining the stability in the Korean Peninsula by focusing on nuclear development. So there's a clear gap, a little bit of gap between Pyongyang and Beijing at the moment. And I think South Korea wants to exploit that gap to ensure, to bring China closer to the previous position of putting priority on denuclearization of North Korea. So I think this is a very clever play, but also it's a high risk play, but then high return play, because if South Korea can indeed drive a wedge between Beijing and Pyongyang, then it's going to act as a pressure on North Korea, and that could bring North Korea back to the negotiation table.
So South Korea is definitely focusing on its strategies there. Now, let's shift a little bit from diplomatic channels to military tensions on the ground. North Korean troops have crossed the military demarcation line 17 times this year, prompting the firing of 25 warning shots. So given inconsistent MDL standards between Seoul and the UN command, Dr. Nielsen-Wright, how serious is the risk of military miscalculation at this point?
Well, I think we have to take it very seriously, partly because those very important ties between Moscow and Pyongyang appear to have emboldened Kim Jong-un. Having said that, this approach of testing the boundaries of the MDL by the North is consistent with the North Korean policy of tearing up that commitment to unification that was the hallmark of Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il's policy towards South Korea. With North Korea now seeing South Korea as a hostile state, it's quite consistent that they would want to reinforce their border and to test the limits of their territorial reach, if you like. The South Korean government, I think, on the one hand, has been quick to signal that it's not changing its own policy when it comes to policing the border, but it has begun to provide instructions to its military officers in that region to expand the definition of that MDL to encompass UN-based definitions of where the line actually lies. In effect, that means there is more time, there is more opportunity for local commanders to draw back from what might involve a troubling escalation in the event of further violations of the line by North Korean forces. On top of that, we've seen the Ministry of Defense re-establish the North Korea Policy Office within the Ministry of Defense. I think that's an effort, to highlight the importance of taking policy towards North Korea seriously when it comes to both these border incursions, but broader strategic risks. And of course, all of this is happening in the context of a Trump administration, which has been troublingly silent on the question of North Korea. The clearest illustration of that was the extraordinary national security strategy that was issued a few days ago, in which North Korea was striking by its absence from any official statement from the United States. And that, I think, is providing genuine anxiety for both policymakers and security specialists in South Korea about the reliability not only of American deterrence when it comes to North Korea, but also assurance, a critical assurance that Seoul needs that Washington is firmly behind it in resisting any of these provocations. President Trump is more preoccupied with issues in the Western Hemisphere, arguably, than he is with events on the peninsula, even though, of course, he's spoken about his desire to meet with Kim Jong-un. So all these efforts at a tactical level, as well as in terms of signaling and outreach towards the North, is consistent with President Lee's pragmatic approach. But of course, we need to remain vigilant. South Korea and UN forces need to keep in mind that Kim Jong-un is a leader who feels, rightly or wrongly, emboldened by his new strategic partnership with Moscow. And that's why the question of policing the border remains, as it always has been, extremely important.
Right. The level of ambiguity near that border is a real red flag for miscalculation that's causing a lot of concerns. But beyond the physical border, Dr. Go, another battlefield is the online battlefield. North Korea reportedly stole over $1.3 billion worth of crypto assets this year, with laundering operations linked to Chinese underground networks. So how central is cybercrime to Pyongyang's sanctions resistance model?
Well, it's still very important, but not as important as they used to be before, especially during the COVID years. Obviously, during the COVID years, North Korea was in the state of a self-isolation. So there wasn't much of opportunity for North Korea to engage in sanctions busting activities. Now that the borders have opened up, North Korea clearly is still engaged in this kind of financial crimes in the cyberspace. As you mentioned, North Korea is targeting soft but rich targets such as cryptocurrency exchanges, especially in cryptocurrency exchanges that are located outside of a major, say, like advanced industrial nations jurisdictions, such as in the Middle East or in the Southeast Asia, which tend to have, relatively speaking, lower level of cybersecurity against the intrusions of this type. Having said that, North Korea is expanding the scope of its cyber activities. Now what North Korea is doing is they are sending out IT workers to basically China and Russia to not just work for Chinese or Russian entities, but also to work remotely for major IT concerns around the world, even in the United States. So just today, there was a report of Amazon.com detecting and then also cutting connection. I mean, essentially cutting out a remote worker. We happen to be a North Korean IT worker based in China, so which is not allowed by Amazon's own internal policies. But then there are brokers out there who are facilitating this kind of remote work for North Korean IT workers. So there are reports that North Koreans are sending out this kind of IT workers to around the world and working remotely and also for local concerns. And this actually represents a new threat vector for the international community, because it's not just about hacking, but then if you are allowed to work remotely for major IT concerns, then these North Korean workers can gain access actually, in fact, legitimately because they are in fact working for these companies. So, so this is another major threat factor that the North Koreans are posing to the international community right now.
Definitely. And given the scale and the sophistication of North Korea's cyber operations, Dr. Nielsen Wright, do you think there's any realistic path to deterring these kinds of attacks, either through sanctions or coordinated international cybersecurity frameworks?
It is, of course, very challenging. I mean, think back now to over a year with the dismantling of the Special Experts Group on UN sanctions that was essentially the body that was responsible for coordinating that international effort, with institutions increasingly weaker, and again, to repeat, with the United States less firmly engaged in the question of coordination in dealing with the sanctions threat, the cyber threat from North Korea. Although some of the public remarks between American and South Korean officials in the last few months have been positive, we do have to, I think, take seriously the fact that North Korea increasingly recognizes that there are economic opportunities to be gained. And in its public remarks, it's been using, ironically, the UN mechanism itself to rail against what North Korea describes as Western coercion. The group of Friends in Defense of the Charter of the United Nations, a group that was set up in 2021 by 18 countries, but includes prominent authoritarian states like China, Russia, and Iran, has recently convened. North Korea is a member. It uses that forum to attack the United States and to present itself as part of a coalition resisting Western domination. So there is not only the cyber subversive activities that the North has been used, but also a diplomatic offensive that Pyongyang is lining up behind. And on top of that, the stark economic reality that as relations between Beijing and Pyongyang have improved, we've seen benefits for North Korea economically. Trade statistics suggest that bilateral trade between China and Pyongyang is at the highest level in 6 years, at some $281 million. That may not seem like a lot in terms of international trade figures, but for North Korea, of course, it's hugely important. And it once again demonstrates that the sanctions regime is porous. There is some evidence that China itself may have been engaging recently in trade with North Korea that challenges some of those sanctions. And so however much China may be susceptible to initiatives from South Korea to drive a wedge, as Dr. Go rightly pointed out. I think it's difficult for the international community to be really confident that it can restrict the economic opportunities that the North Koreans have been so assiduous in cultivating and acquiring, not only with China, but of course with Russia as a result of their deployment of military forces to Kursk.
Right, so it will depend on the partners of North Korea over their will to cooperate or not regarding this. Now, let's also turn to the regime's internal direction, Dr. Go. So looking ahead, we are expecting North Korea's 9th Party Congress early next year. It's largely described as a turning point by the state media. So what kind of political message or internal shift should we expect from it?
So the next Party Congress is going to be very remarkable, especially for the North Korean watchers, because this is the end year for the 5-year plan that North Korea had announced back in 2021, the last Party Congress in North Korea, the 8th Party Congress. Back then, North Korea had announced a very fundamental shift in their economic policies. So North Korea had previously allowed the market system to flourish in North Korea, to a limited extent. But then starting in 2021, in response to international sanctions, as well as the conditions of the COVID-19, self-isolation caused by the COVID-19 quarantine, North Korea had essentially tried to eliminate the market elements in each economy and try to re-centralize the economic planning. And so they touched the plan, 5-year economic plan that they had announced back then. So this year is going to be the end year for that plan. And so in the 9th Party Congress next month, we are expecting to see what kind of outcome the plan has achieved. So how are North Koreans going to evaluate this? So obviously North Koreans are unlikely to accept failure if the plan had failed. But nonetheless, we can read between the lines and try to discern the hints for how successful or unsuccessful the plan was. So I think that's going to fundamentally characterize North Korea's economic directions in the next 5 years as well. So this is so it's going to be a very important opportunity for North Korean watchers around the world to see what happened in the last 5 years in the economic domain of North Korea. So that's one thing to watch out for. The second thing is the possibility of North Korea elevating Kim Jong-un even higher. So you might think that's not possible anymore because Kim Jong-un is clearly a totalitarian dictator. But then, but there is symbolism there because North Korea might actually give a new title to Kim Jong-un, and chances that North Korea might give Kim Jong-un the title of president. So this is a way for North Korea to put merge two figures together. There's a figurative head of state, but also the actual head of the state. And for a long time, North Korea had this just a split system. But if the two are merged, this is a very important milestone for North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. And we think that's possible because North Korea has achieved high level of diplomatic prestige thanks to its partnership with Russia. With North Korea's contribution to Russia's war efforts in Ukraine. So, and then North Korea had assessed that this has been, their contribution to Russian war effort to have been highly successful, made North Korea an important international player. So maybe North Korea is going to essentially celebrate that by giving Kim Jong-un a new title. So I think these are all things that we are watching out for very carefully right now.
Wow, so we would be looking for possibly some drastic changes by early next year. We will keep close tabs on the latest developments. But as for now, we will have to conclude our discussion right here. Thank you so much for your insights, Dr. Go.
My pleasure.
And Professor Nielsen Wright, of course, we really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.